Hi, I'm Beth,
And I'm Mark. Liz Hoffman Bauer, my mother in law.
and my mother asked us to put together an Earth Day presentation for Evensong. A little background about us: we live in Northern California, about 2 hours from the ocean and the redwoods, and several hours from Southern Oregon.
We're both wildlife biologists. I work for the Shasta Trinity National Forest, which is over 2 million acres of trees and mountains and wilderness.
We've put together a short program to explain what Earth Day is, along with a few of our biggest environmental concerns and some creative solutions.
So here's a video on the origins of Earth Day.
Every year on April 22nd, Earth Day marks the anniversary of the birth of the modern environmental movement. In the 1960s, Americans were using leaded gas in cars. Factories were belching out smoke. In 1962, Rachel Carson published her book, Silent Spring, showing the effects of DDT on living organisms, and it raised the public awareness of the link between pollution and public health. Wisconsin Senator Gaylord Nelson, an environmentalist, witnessed the ravages of a massive oil spill in Santa Barbara, California in 1969. Inspired by the teach-ins against the Vietnam War, Senator Nelson envisioned a day dedicated to environmental awareness. He teamed up with Pete McCloskey, a Republican congressman, and Dennis Hayes, a young activist, to organize the campus teach-ins. They called it Earth Day, which sparked national media attention and caught on across the country. Earth Day inspired 20 million Americans, fully 10% of the population, to take to the streets and parks to demonstrate against the impacts of environmental pollution. The first Earth Day led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the passage of the Clean Air Act. 2 years later, Congress passed the Clean Water Act, and a year after that, the Endangered Species Act. In 1990, Earth Day went global with 200 million people in 141 countries demonstrating. It paved the way for the 1992 United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. It also prompted President Bill Clinton to award Senator Nelson the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his role as Earth Day founder. Today, Earth Day is celebrated around the world as a way to promote environmental awareness and a reminder that all of us can do our part to protect the Earth.
We're facing some very serious environmental issues today. 3 that we'll touch on are climate change, loss of biodiversity and habitat, and plastic pollution.
A primary cause of climate change is the burning of fossil fuels. You can't watch the news without seeing climate change in action in the form of extreme weather. Winter storms in Texas that cause blackouts, heat waves and droughts that fuel wildfires, record hurricanes, tornadoes, torrential rains, and flooding.
Forest fires in Northern California are getting worse as climate change intensifies. Here's a video clip of firefighters known as smoke jumpers responding to one of these wildfires. Last year, a fire called the August Complex burned over 1 million acres near here. We live just 90 minutes away from the northern end of that fire, and it filled the skies here with smoke for much of the summer. This image shows the smoke and the haze of wildfires at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco.
Other problems we've seen in our town have been droughts. We go several months at a time without a drop of rain, and some years our water table is very low. To conserve water, we replaced all of our grass with water-conserving plants and wood chips as ground cover.
So here's a short video on climate change and fossil fuels.
The video mentioned a nature-positive economy. That simply means integrating nature into business decisions to preserve the biodiversity of the Earth.
In order to slow climate change, we need to drastically reduce our use of fossil fuels and transition to renewable energy. One example of how this can be done is electric vehicles, or EVs.
Think about automated cars. Most surveys now say people don't trust a robot car. The same thing happened 100 years ago when automated elevators were introduced. It used to be there was a person in the elevator, and when they took them out, people were upset. They didn't want to use it. They felt it was dangerous, and it's really the same situation we have now with automated cars. If we really want to cut greenhouse gases, this is it. This vehicle is automated, electric, shared. This is the vision of the future right here in this vehicle. The transportation system we have now is perhaps the most inefficient, resource-intensive system you could imagine. We are using so much energy. We are using so much land for roads, land for parking, and we're producing so much greenhouse gases. What's so exciting now is we see 3 revolutions happening or about to happen in transportation. We're seeing electrification of vehicles. For sure, within a couple decades, Lyft and Uber have transformed how we move people, or really how we could move people. And it's not carrying one person at a time, it's carrying multiple people. And then in the future, perhaps best of all, we'll take this pooling style of moving people around and marry it with automation.
Another huge environmental problem is biodiversity and habitat loss. Biodiversity means the total variety of all life on Earth. The more biodiversity, the more stable our Earth is. In the last 50 years, our human activities have reduced wildlife habitats, reduced populations of wild animals by 60%, and driven many species extinct. The rate of extinction is accelerating, with 1 million species currently at risk of dying out completely within decades.
Here are some photos of just a few animals that may go extinct in the near future. One of them, the northern spotted owl, is very familiar to both of us. It lives here in the old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest, and Beth and I actually met while monitoring spotted owls for the U.S. Forest Service. Their numbers have declined sharply since the destruction of old-growth forests began over 150 years ago. These forests may take centuries to regrow, and in the meantime, populations of northern spotted owls continue to decline.
More than 40% of insects are declining, and that includes insects that pollinate our crops.
Globally, we're losing 10 billion trees a year. Destruction of forests releases more carbon into the atmosphere, which just accelerates climate change even more. Protecting and restoring forests will slow climate change and help clean our air and water.
Standard farming practices contribute greatly to the greenhouse gas effect. Regenerative agriculture is a way of farming that reduces greenhouse gases, water consumption, and provides more food on less land. It also increases plant diversity and rebuilds topsoil. Here's a video that explains it.
Regenerative agriculture is a set of farming practices that increase biodiversity in soil organic matter. Currently, most agricultural practices are devastating to biodiversity. Even organic agriculture, while not as bad, still does more harm than good. Regenerative agriculture is a way to reverse this trend to actually make a positive impact on the land. So what does regenerative agriculture actually involve? Answering this question is actually pretty tricky, because the practices that work best largely depend on the land that's being worked with. So the variety of different practices border on infinity, a bit more than this video can cover. However, let's look at 3 common forms that regenerative agriculture can take. The soil is full of organisms which are helpful for plants. Some convert soil nitrogen into a plant-usable form. Some bring water to the plants that would otherwise be out of reach. Others loosen and aerate the soil, increasing water absorption and allowing plant roots to penetrate deeper. When soil is turned over by a machine, most of these organisms are killed, so the crops must rely on chemical fertilizer, which ends up leaching into the water. Central to no-till farming is to not do that. Instead of tilling, plant cover crops whose roots break up the soil. Let the worms aerate the soil and bring down nutrients. Keep the soil covered with an organic mulch, which will break down over time, adding more organic matter to the soil. From the release of methane to clearing forests for pasture land, cattle raising is known for being very environmentally destructive. But this is not inherent to grazing animals. If the right practices are put in place, enormous amounts of carbon can be sequestered into the ground, soil can be built, and even desertification can be reversed in a matter of years. Here's how it works. The growth of grass tends to start slow, accelerate, and slow down again. This middle area is where it accrues the most biomass the most efficiently. If it's eaten before it gets to this point, its growth will never speed up. This is what happens with traditional pastured animals. They eat all the grass, which doesn't have the chance to grow back fast enough before getting eaten again, and we have overgrazing. This leads to soil erosion, drought, and desertification. But if the animals are kept in a tightly packed herd, like they used to be in nature, the grass has time to grow before being eaten. All that biomass in the grass is carbon that comes from the air. Not all of the grass gets eaten, however. Some of it gets pooped on and trampled, which ends up creating the perfect conditions for new topsoil to be built. This ends up happening incredibly quickly. This is one of the most complex and location-dependent practices there are. I will therefore be overgeneralizing a bit. It always starts with observing a local forest and the relationships between everything in it. The plants, the animals, the fungi, the landscape, the soil, the water, and then recreating these relationships in a way that's just as ecologically resilient, but produces more food. Food forests are often thought of as comprising 7 layers: the root layer, the ground cover layer, the herb layer, the shrub layer, the low tree layer, the high tree layer, and the vine layer. Every one of these layers either produces some sort of food or medicine, or is in some way helpful to the system as a whole. The plants are mostly perennials and include as many native species as possible. These 3 examples of regenerative agriculture, plus all the rest of them, all have something in common. Whereas in conventional agriculture, you seek to create as many of one thing as possible, in regenerative agriculture, you seek to create as many relationships between things as possible. You are one of those things. What sort of relationship with the land do you want to foster?
That last video briefly explained agroforestry. So here's the story of one farmer in Central America who has put the concepts of regenerative agriculture and agroforestry into action.
Agroforestry for me is one ecosystem to produce sustainable products today, tomorrow, and also in the future. The canopy is really important because they permitted the connectivity for the different ecosystems. The forests produce the condition for the healthy rain. The trees help all the plants to survive better here in the farm. In the farm, in the forestry ecosystem, we have around 22 different crops. Bananas, a different species, pineapples, white color, yellow color, we have sour sap, 6 different species of citrus, we have cinnamon, we have vanilla, we have cacao.
Our final topic is about, well, let this video clip from The Graduate remind you.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
Have you noticed how pervasive plastic is in our environment? You take a walk around the block or hike in the woods and you see discarded bottles along the sidewalks and trails, or worse, you go to the ocean and see plastic scattered on the beach. And to make matters worse, in the past year we've lost our recycling center. It feels wrong to throw away so much in the trash. I have to drive an hour to a large town just to recycle anything.
Here's a video by an organization called Plastic Oceans with some ideas on how we can all reduce the use of plastics.
And what can each of us do to have an impact? Plastic Oceans has come up with 9 ways to reduce plastic. A company called the Great Ocean Cleanup has found a way to clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a floating island of plastic debris that's the size of Texas. The debris collects together because of the ocean currents. This patch is just one of 5 huge garbage patches that now exist in oceans around the world.
1.8 trillion pieces of plastic float at the surface of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Here,
The ocean cleanup is deploying the world's first technological solution to this growing problem. The principle behind it is simple. Create a coastline where there are none. Concentrate the plastic. A support vessel comes by to take out the concentrated plastic, like a garbage truck of the ocean. The plastic is then transported to land, recycled, and made into durable products. This is the first of a fleet of 60 systems. Once deployed, the fleet is expected to clean up 50% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch every 5 years.
The Great Ocean Cleanup Project discovered that 80% of plastics in the ocean come from 1,000 of the largest rivers across the world. They're now using the Interceptor, which is a barge that collects plastic in rivers before it can even get to the ocean. And they hope to remove 90% of the plastic from rivers and oceans in the future.
Many people are coming up with ways to slow down the release of greenhouse gases and reverse climate change and reduce plastics in our environment. The Central American nation of Costa Rica is putting many of these ideas into action.
We do not have oil or carbon or steel or any other natural resources. But the good part is our most important resource is people, and we need to invest in people. And having an educated population is the best way to trigger not only economic growth, but development and well-being, and peace as well. Investing in human development has been one of the best investments of Costa Rica. We are aiming to decarbonize our economy. And what's the goal? Is reduce the emissions and the usage of fossil fuels, while at the same time we keep growing. And we plan to do that by plugging our clean electric matrix to mostly transportation. From all the energy we use in Costa Rica, 70% is on transport. So if we plug that 30%, that's electricity and it's clean, to transportation, we can rapidly reduce the usage of fossil fuels, be more competitive, more clean, and not dependent on petrol or on oil and on fossil fuels. So that's our plan to the years to come.
I lived in Costa Rica for 2 years, and it was a very beautiful and friendly country. I remember once seeing the president of Costa Rica driving his own car downtown with his window rolled down, waving to the people. That would never happen in the United States. The theme for Earth Day 2021 is Restore Our Earth. It focuses on solutions to our problems and not just adapting to the impacts of climate change and other environmental damage. Scientists, organizations, businesses, and governments worldwide are looking at new green technologies to restore the Earth's ecosystems and forests, conserve and rebuild soils, improve farming practices, restore wildlife populations, and rid the world's oceans of plastics.
President Biden will convene a global leaders summit on Earth Day, which will focus on combating climate change. For more information about Earth Day, go to earthday.org.
Together, we have the power to restore our Earth. This concludes our presentation. Thanks for watching. We'll leave you with this song written to honor the planet and nature.
Our cosmic oasis, cosmic blue pearl, our most beautiful, wonderful world. All the nations, all the oceans, flora, fauna, land and the sea. We all are one, part of the earth. We all are one, home is our earth. We all are one, part of the earth. We all are one, home is our earth. All the people who live across the lands, brothers, sisters, let's join our hands.